people ask themselves, this is actually good, Patrick. I got a great chart on this. I should say you have a great chart on this because you found this chart. It's a good one that shows why we're bringing so many people into the country. And this one here showing population growth by natural, so natural increase, which is essentially births minus deaths. You really see this has come down significantly since the 1980s. Which is to be expected. And I think I don't see this going up much anyways. I'd be curious to see what those population experts or twexperts, what they say, because the reason this was so huge in the 80s, by the way, is because from the 80s, that kind of 80 to 90 period, that's where the baby boomers were having all their babies, which is why it was so high. And it's been come down since because of that natural, the baby boomers getting older. Now the millennials have an interesting, because they're a pretty big cohort too, but you're just not seeing that pickup in terms of millennial babies.
Well, if you're on Twitter, they'll say because they're still living at home, they can't afford a home for their family, and there's probably some truth to that. When you look at the larger markets, which is Ontario based, and Vancouver a little bit. So when you look at the bigger populated, Ontario, Quebec are those big populations. So when you look at those numbers, yeah, they're probably going, no, I can't afford a house. I'm not going to have children. So we know that story is definitely happening. Again, when we look at this particular chart, natural births is really quite low. We need that immigration. And anybody who's got some common sense understands that immigration is in fact a very, very good thing. The challenge that we're facing is it seems to be almost ad hoc, throw a bunch of people into the mix and see what happens as opposed to having any kind of control on it. So, the negative side of that is the downside that we're feeling is the effects on our infrastructure, our healthcare. And a lot of what's happening right now is where are those people going to work? And, it's kind of a weird world in terms of that immigration and how our federal government has opened up the gates with seemingly no controls over how that immigration is coming in. And even the filters of which they're coming in terms of their qualifications, what are their skill sets? It seems to be pretty random, and that's becoming problematic. And again, when we look at those numbers, there's something to pay attention to, is these are a lot of non-permanent residents and a lot of international students. And it's a mess in behind the scenes. Anybody who's paying attention is starting to see that kind of those headlines where international students, it's like 6 to a bump. It's crazy what's going on. That is more about the school system, the university college system, than it is about the government. These are all different conversations. From a real estate investment point of view, they're probably going to start to see a shift over the next couple of years of international students. And if you are kind of banking on that, if that's the cohort you're playing or the game you're playing, you need to be aware of that.
Yeah, it's definitely the student rental market is strong. There's no doubt about that. And curious to see where people are going to go, because you're seeing a lot of people that got out of the student rental market when COVID first hit, because that market was decimated when COVID first hit. In fact, when COVID hit, I remember you and I talking, and we did an event, and a lot of people with student rentals came to that event, and they said, what should we do? And I said, you should immediately convert your student rental to a long-term rentals until this passes. Those who did that, by the way, were very, very fortunate, because they rode the wave of higher rents. They rode the wave of tighter vacancies for the last 2-3 years. And now some of those people are going back into student rentals, or they're selling off those properties, or whatever the case may be. But that was a good move, and that's what a good real estate investor does, is you react to the market based on what's being presented to you.
Listen, the international student conversation is very politically charged. And so, there's no point in getting into it in that regard. We don't have control over it. Just know that these things are going to probably start to change. It's been a cash cow for a lot of universities, even to the degree that, when you lift the hood on it, they charge more for international students coming to their schools than they do from already placed Canadians going to the universities. They charge a different price. It's just this huge controversial issue. So I don't need to get into it. For investors who are playing that game, you may want to pay attention to it and just know that I think this music's going to stop too.
Interesting. Patrick, I want to go back though. Listen, this is not on my sticky notes, but we got to bring it up, because you just talked about this narrative that people have about, I can't afford a home, and the millennials are still at home and they're in the basements and all this stuff. And I agree. Listen, I get that. I hear what people are saying, but I find it fascinating, and I just think it's an interesting. I know some people that that still rent. They're into their late 30s. They're still renting. And I asked them why they're renting. And this is funny. And I say, now they can afford a home. I know their income. I know they can afford a home. They have the cash to be able to put a down payment. But here's the thing. They don't want the home they can afford. That's the truth of it. They don't want a starter home. They're not willing to buy something that requires a little upgrade, needs some work, doesn't have quartz countertops, doesn't have granite, doesn't have hardwood floors, doesn't have an ensuite bathroom, doesn't have a steam shower. I mean, I think, and I find this fascinating because, Pastor, you don't have to go back very far. Look at your generation. You started out by buying a piece of crap home that you put a lot of sweat equity in to start and get your real estate journey started. So did I, right? And a lot of the younger people aren't willing to do that. If you rewind the tape even further back from your generation, I mean, I was talking to my dad about this. He was telling me about his dad who literally stuffed newspapers to insulate the walls because they couldn't afford insulation. In fact, insulation wasn't invented back then, but that's for another story. The point is that people they did what they had to do. Today's generation is very different. I'm not knocking them for that, but I'm saying that's a huge part why people say they can't afford a home. I call bullshit on most of that, because if they really wanted a home, they can afford one. They just have to move to a center that's not Toronto or that's not Vancouver. They got to get out of town a little bit. They have to increase their commute. All of these things are possible. They choose not to.
Well, and I mean, certainly, I think that's part of it. I mean, there's also a mindset with a lot of particular cohort of generations where they don't want to own a home. I think it's a controversial issue. Nobody has the answers, and there isn't one thing.
That's okay. Those that don't want a home, I'm okay with that, Patrick. Yeah. But it's not those people that are sitting on Twitter, the Twexperts, that are bullshitting about the fact that they can't afford a home. If they don't want a home, fine. You don't need to have a home. It's not a necessary thing. But those that do want a home, they might want to adjust their expectation and they can have a home.
Listen, there's so much out there. It's a controversial issue. So I hear what you're saying. And then along the lines, forget about affordability in terms of buying a home. There's affordability when it comes to the issue of being able to rent a home and being able to even find a home to live in. And a lot of this is based on what's happening with immigration, people coming into the country. And of course, they end up in Toronto, they end up in Ontario. And when they look at the availability of homes to live in, they're just not there. So Canada's inviting people to the country, come here, and then people are getting here, and number one, they can't find a place to live. Number two, they can't afford a place that they do find to live, and then they have to say, well, where do I go? And it's just right now, there's so much, and there's so many people coming into the country. This is all causing a lot of different problems. Again, it's politically charged. It isn't any one thing. Everybody wants to find, this is the answer, that is the answer. There is no one answer. There's a lot of different, I guess we'll call them lanes, that people play in, and a lot of different problems that are being created by the degree of immigration and the housing shortage. So let's just give this one fundamental base underlying foundation, which is investors. When we invest in real estate, the fundamental, or often the fear that new investors particularly have, is, will I get my place rented out? Will I actually get the rent I need? Will there be a demand for my piece of real estate? And never before have we been able to say as positively, if you buy a good piece of real estate and you manage it well and you make sure you're buying it right and doing all the things you need to do, there's a lineup of people that want to rent your property. And it's softer at times in different regions? Yes. But I mean, your worst case scenario, I think anywhere in the country, is like a 3.5% vacancy rate, JG. That's as close to being empty as you can get. Like, that's as close to being, you can't get lower, because there's people always moving, right? So
it's a phenomenal bull market for rent. For those who own real estate, it's a great market to be renting real estate in. There's no doubt about that, for sure. But here's what's interesting about I'm going to show another slide here that talks about the construction investment, how it's gone down a lot. In fact, in the last couple of years, And Patrick, a little bit, this, I love showing, of course, graphs. I think they tell a great story. But I'll tell you, boots on the ground, and you saw my work boots a while ago, like you saw my muck boots. I mean, these are real work boots here, bro.
Don't
And
ever show that with me. They don't ever share that with me again. Really.
you saw they were dusty. Like
I
these
saw.
are,
I saw.
you know. But here's a feet on the street analysis of this, and this is fascinating. August, in my view, has marked a real turning point for trades. Since the beginning, since COVID started, trades have went bananas, right? Everyone has been booked solid. Prices were going up. Nobody was negotiating anything. Timelines, you called a trade person and said, listen, here's my timeline. They would just laugh at you and say, I don't really care what your timeline is. Here's when I can get in there. And it's probably going to be 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months until then, if not years. Okay. But August, things have shifted in August. I'm seeing it firsthand where I'm getting phone calls from tradespeople saying,
hey, what do you got on the go, JG? What kind of renovation projects are you going?
And they're starting to warm up their database because they know the jobs are slowing down. So I'm starting to see that happen. And I started seeing that in early September. But my real test actually happened in the last 5 days, which is we have a big project going on in Oshawa right now. And a lot of my trades are in Peterborough, Lindsay, and in the markets that we do most of our business. So I said to my project manager, I want you to go out there and see if you can build some new trade relationships. And listen, in a hot market, trade relationships go one way. It sounds like this. Hey, do you want to come and give us a quote? Come to this project? No. Click. Like that's how it typically works. Let me tell you, he worked the phone for only a couple hours, and this was on Thursday of last week. And by Monday, so Thursday, there's only one work day, which is Thursday and Friday, and then the weekend. And by Monday, he was booked solid with meetings, painters, drywallers, carpenters, electricians. Everybody was lining up to come and see our project. That's because they're getting hungry for work, Patrick. And that's showing in this chart. So feet on the street, this is in fact happening. How long is it going to last? I don't know, because there are some trades that are still quite booked up. HVAC is a good example. Drywallers, they're always impossible. But yeah, very interesting what's happening feet on the street right now.
I think you see the trades and say, well, where are their strengths in the trades? So you use drywallers as an example, or HVAC. I mean, how many people are even in that trade and what's the demand? So there's a lot of projects that are coming to fruition. The biggest thing in here is the investment. In this case, they're saying that the investment is starting to drop. And I think that's going to continue. I mean, builders have to look at ultimately at the costs of doing a project. And when you look at interest rates today, it's, quite frankly, do you want to pay that kind of rate in a project that's going to take some time to bring together? And I think that's the bigger issue. So there's a little bit of concern there, is that they're tapped the brake, and some of it just outright said no more projects right now. We're seeing a lot of completions in the condo market, coming to fruition. So we're going to see what this market does, but it is interesting to know that at the end of the day, any kind of detached residence or home is not. It's just there's not enough. Full stop.
Yeah, it's interesting. Now this graph here you're seeing is actually a little bit of an extension of the last one. The last one was about investment in the construction sector. This here, Patrick, is slowing labor demand in Canada. Altogether, you're seeing the unemployment rate starting to tick up. This is something you talked about a couple months ago, and it's coming to fruition. Another good call by you with good timing, might I add. So congrats.
Well, I think there's a few things that we have to pay attention to on the unemployment side of it. I think it is going to uptick. We need to pay attention to what it's going to be. It actually needs to, and I can't stress that enough, because when it comes to Tiff Macklem, Bank of Canada, government, blah blah blah, they're going to control inflation, all the rest of it. When we start to see unemployment tick up, when we start to see job vacancies go lower, we have to understand that I don't want to call it deflationary, but it takes the inflationary pressure off. And if we can keep labor costs under control, the demand for wage increases to the degree that we can, given the cost of living, given inflation, that'll be helpful for us. And we want to pay attention to it. I still like to see it in that 6.5 range. I'm not worried about 7. in economically. When you start to get over 7, yeah, you start to get a little bit nervous about what's going on. So we have to watch it really closely because it is, in fact, a picture of what's happening on the productivity side of it. Now, we don't have the charts in here, so I'll just tell you right now that manufacturing in Canada continues to trend down. It's at flat at best. Our import exports have always been weak, continue to be weak. Our productivity in general, because we were so debt driven, dependent on housing, that is kind of eating our lunch when we look at GDP. So there's nothing right now to pick up all of that slack on a national basis. We start to see provincially in Alberta and Saskatchewan, for example, we see a little bit more because of oil and gas and because they're just really two strong provinces right now.
Very good. Patrick, I think that about covers update number 1 on the macro update. Boom. And that also, we talked about population in there. So we're going to do 2 sticky notes at once. Never been done before on this show.
Wow.
Sticky notes at one.
Okay.
Boom.
Did we talk about the Canadian involuntary labor? So in other words, part-time workers that are able to work full-time, this is a leading indicator. Part-time workers that want to work full-time but can't find full-time work. That's a bit of a flag. That is definitely in that orange flag territory and could get to red flag territory.
Well, it just means it's pointing exactly where we thought it was going, which is a little bit uptick in terms of unemployment, is people that want to work, the work's not there. And that's because you're seeing that slowdown we've been talking about.
Yes.
If you like what you learned here, go to the description below and subscribe for our free Insiders newsletter, where you can also stay up to date for our upcoming events and our courses.
If you want to see more stuff like this, click here. If you want to see the entire show, click there.